All right, guys. This week we are going to be looking at advertising. This is always a fun segment just because um, everyone always believes that they aren't affected by advertising. And you can say that as much as you want, but in reality, you're always impacted in some way. There's actually been studies done that show that people who deny, and say that advertising has no effect on them are actually some of the most impacted. And so it's interesting, right? You would think if you constantly think you're not, you won't be, but the opposite has proved true to them. And so advertising is just an interesting topic. It's one that will influence every aspect of media. It is the moneymaker for media in a lot of ways. And so, um, let's get started. I do want to say, though, if you are interested in advertising, our advertising competition team actually won the national championship in 2022. They're working hard as they gear up to go this spring to hopefully keep that title. But we are very good at coming up with advertising campaigns and the creative aspect and the marketing aspect. And if that's something that interests you, um, let me know and we can get you into some of our advertising areas. So one of the things I want you to think about as you go through this lecture is um, when you are buying something or the last time you bought something, how did you make the decision to buy it? Some of us are very um, gun ho. We buy things because we know we like them and we know we want them. And other people take their time, do a lot of research, are very hesitant. And so, what about your individual personality makes you want to buy something? And how are you influenced by advertising out in the world? So, keep that in mind as we go through this lecture. Now, advertising has not always been a modern technology or a modern advancement. People have been trying to sell things since the beginning of time. Babylonian merchants would actually hire people to shout and bark out prices in different markets that they would set up. The Romans would write announcements with prices and different advertisements on their city walls. Um, we've had ads that were hung up everywhere for anything for housing to um, selling food and materials to any other kind of want or need, or to say, hey, we need your help selling these things. Come work for us. We've had shop bills, which are attractive, artful business cards that eventually turned into what we know as like billboards or magazine advertisements. And then, of course, news books, which are signs above businesses that caught your attention. So marquees or billboards or just logos that say, hey, we have something that you might like. So advertising is not this, new innovation of the last couple of centuries. It's been around a long time, and it's just gotten more advanced, and we've put more research into it. I wanted to show you this quick video. It shows a little bit of a timeline of advertising and how it has advanced throughout the years, and gives you a better concept of like the history of advertising. So, as you can see, um, advertising has been the same, but it's also advanced throughout the years, just as technology has advanced. And you saw many of the mass communication tools that we've used or talked about in this class were in that video, right? So you saw billboards, newspapers, books, and then radio and television and movies and smartphones, which we're going to be talking about coming up with social media. And so it's just advanced as we have advanced as a society. Now, one of the biggest revolutions in advertising was during another influential revolution, which was the industrial one. Um, this was around the time of the Civil War, a little before it, and advertising started to expand during that time. A lot of that had to do with the ability to print for the masses, and we saw magazines becoming rather popular at this time. But you also saw like traveling salesmen, the train system was being established. We were getting more advanced when it came to sending postage. And so advertising started to really envelop that era. Um, and when you look at magazines or just any type of media form in general, advertisers really become the sole supporter of those mediums because they allow for a cheaper consumer price because they're paying the brunt of it to get their advertisements out and to you, and therefore the cost of whatever you want to read or listen to or watch it goes significantly down because of that. Um, with that, during the Civil War and World War I, we start getting what is called the advertising agency, or just a business that is dedicated to advertising itself. Um, with that, they also learned that you could be more creative with your advertising. It didn't have to be just a straight sale. And with that, advertising became more expensive and it started becoming larger than life. And you'll see that as we go into from World War I to World War II, it becomes very specialized into exactly what not only people in society want, but what the government is trying to tell the society they need as well. In 1869, we get the first full service advertising agency. And then by 1914, the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, is established, and it's established in part to start regulating advertising, just to make sure that we're not trying to sell things and lie to people. Now, do things get by during this time period? Yes, but we did have this idea that maybe we should look at what's going on and make sure that we aren't trying to harm people while we're advertising to them. Through that, a lot of organizations come about, and some of those organizations are still around today. You have the Audit Bureau of Circulation, which is now the Alliance for Audited Media, the Advertising Federation of America, which is who hosts the student advertising competition that Tech is the national championship of. Um, and so forth and so on. You have all these different entities that focus on advertising for specific reasons, specific areas, specific audiences. And it's really just to not only help regulate advertising, but also allow those who are involved in the advertising industry to network and talk to each other. So we talked a little bit about how advertising with magazines became a really big deal, and started really pushing the idea of ads. But radio was also a huge um, push for advertising because it seemed like a natural way to keep it free for people. People could buy their radio and then not have to pay for a subscription to listen to it. Therefore, people in the ad industry or companies could pay radio stations to play their ads to entice people to buy their products. And they kept the radio companies afloat while people were able to use it for free. Now we see that that has gone back in today's society, right? So you pay for things like Sirius, um, Spotify, Apple Music, things like that, and you usually pay for a premium service where you don't have to hear ads. But if you want it for free, that's where you do hear them. Um, of course, after radio, they started taking over on television, and this is kind of where we see the birth of soap operas come in. They traveled from radio to television, but a lot of companies would sponsor soap operas so that they could advertise to the women that were at home. Then we get World War II come in, and during 1941, the War Advertising Council stepped in, and really this was a way to push the idea that we as Americans have to stick together. You need to be investing in war bonds. It was where we get like Rosie the Riveter, Uncle Sam, we want you for the army, those kinds of ads to really bring in an idea of a united country. So it wasn't as much selling a product other than the bonds, but the sell the idea of, hey, we need to come together, we need to beat the Nazis, do what you can for that process. Once we got into advertising and television, we see a few things start standing out with ads. One of them being a USP or a unique selling proposition. And basically, when you have any type of product, it's called a parody product. And that means that there's tons of products that do the same thing, right? Um, Medicine is one of those. So you have the generic brand and you have the name brand. They still do the same thing, but one's going to cost more than the other because of a name. Same with soda, cereal, anything and everything. Cars are essentially the same, but you pay for different things. And so to demonstrate why a certain product or a certain brand is special, you come up with a USB. And this is just the unique way in which a certain product, which is similar to another, is better. And with that, in 1971, we get the National Advertising Review Board. And this was basically established because one brand would say, well, we make the best whatever. So say we make the best Coke or soda or cleaning product, whatever. This other brand doesn't hold up to us. And this board would go in and say, well, why can you say that? Has there been studies done? Do you have proof? You can't just say that you're better for one reason or another. And that way you also can't lie about a product as well. And so this is where you get that distinct idea of, well, we got to be creative in why we're different. One of those major companies was Coca-Cola. At the time, Coke and Pepsi were they were fighting. They're still fighting today about who is better. But Coca-Cola has done some really innovative things with their brand, and not only selling that, hey, we're this, soda pop concoction that you can drink, but we're selling you something else. And I wanted to show you kind of an evolution of their commercials to see what they're selling to their audience.
When you look hot, feel hot, and are hot, pause, go to the refrigerator and get an ice-cold Coca-Cola. You'll find it so refreshing. Everywhere and anytime, the game has an added zest when you pause for refreshment with an ice-cold Coca-Cola. It tingles with delicious taste. Coca-Cola is the favorite beverage in countless homes. Young and old, rich and poor, all enjoy its delicious taste. Ice-cold Coca-Cola quenches your thirst. Coca-Cola is pure, wholesome refreshment. Thirst asks nothing more.
Wouldn't this be a good time for you and your guests to have Coca-Cola too?
Yes, and Coca-Cola is so delicious, so refreshing, so tempting to any guest when you bring out those familiar bottles with tiny beads of moisture running down their frosty sides, assuring you that the Coke inside is really ice cold. And the good, the gracious, the friendly homes of America are always prepared for hospitality, not only on Thanksgiving Day, but every day all the year around, no matter who comes to call or who happens to drop in. And one of the easiest, simplest, and surest ways in the world to be prepared for hospitality is to have plenty of Coca-Cola in your refrigerator, ice cold and ready to serve all the time. It's a wonderful way to say to folks, so glad you came. Welcome anytime.
Coca-Cola has the taste you never get tired of, always refreshing. That's why things go better with Coke after Coke after Coke.
You beat the team you had to beat. Hey, look! You did it in the dust and heat. Now you're thirsty and hot, and you know what to do. 'Cause there's something big waiting for me and you. Coke is it, the biggest taste you've ever found. Coke is it, the one that never lets you down. Coke is it, the most refreshing taste around. Coke is it, Coke is it.
Can't beat it. The feeling you get from a Coca-Cola. Can't beat the real thing. You can't beat the feeling.
Buď svůj a nakonoží každý den. Buď svůj, Coca-Colu si vychutnej. Vychutnej.
It feels good in my heart, in my soul, when you're here right beside me. I will never let this day to end. No one can stop me when I taste the feeling.
Right. So you can see throughout all the ads, Coca-Cola is selling the drink, right? They always have someone drinking it. They talk about the refreshness of it. but they're also selling this lifestyle, right? This happiness, this coming together of your family and your friends that only Coke can bring. It literally says on the screen right now, taste the feeling. And so you learn this unique selling proposition comes into play, that it's not just about the drink, it's about how the drink makes you feel and what it can do for you in your community, your society, your social life, right? So, um, when you think of advertising, a lot of you will probably say, oh, yeah, advertising is big on television. We talked a little bit about radio and we talked a little bit about magazines, but advertising is what is keeping a lot of magazines in business and afloat. In the late 19th century, as we were beginning to see more magazines increase in circulation, they were being sent across the country, even across the world, as we had the means to do that. Um, Advertisers weren't just having to target a small regional audience, they could start targeting the whole country, the whole nation, and they could start selling things in a bigger capacity. Now, because of that, magazine revenue increased, and this really brought in the idea of national trends. Before that, things would become popular, but they may be popular at different times across the country. But this really solidified that, things would become popular and people wanted them at a certain time. For the first time in US history, mass circulation allowed not only news and stories and consumer goods and fashion to be kind of diffused across a wide regional area, but it also allowed for um, geographically diverse customers to read and see the same stories and the same advertisements. And then we get even more into it is that they start becoming even more niche. So you see magazine ads or magazine covers or even newspaper covers that change depending on what region they're in. So they're still selling the same product, but they are changing to better fit a certain audience. And so they become nationally broad, but also niche at the same time. Advertisers really fought and bought into this because a larger audience means that they can sell more things. Advertising space went up in cost because of that. And we just see this boom in not only um, a shift in media from it, but also just in the advertising media in general. One of the biggest target audiences we have seen throughout the decades is women. And I'm not saying that because women are more susceptible or, more willing to buy things. It was just that women were the consumers who bought magazines, who watched the television, who were at home listening to radio ads during that time. And so we see that advertisers really took hold of that and started advertising specifically to women. And so a lot of ads were, you know, specified to them to make them feel like, oh, I need this in my household. I need this to be, you know, wanted by my husband. My kids need this. This is what society is telling me I need. Um, and so you see things like perfume and soaps and dresses and vacuums and cleaning products become popular with women in women magazines. But even things like cigarettes, they really saw that they could advertise, cigarettes to women to say, hey, this will make you more wanted, this will help you be stress free, all these different things. And they could sell more to them because they were consuming the advertising. In an example of that is in 1911, Woodbury Soap Company became the first to really use their product to entice women by being sexual. So basically, they were the first to say, hey, sex sells. And they came up with this ad slogan that says, if you use our soap, it's the skin you love to touch. And it was so popular that from 1911 up until the 1940s, Woodbury used this slogan or this idea because they just said sex appeal made it one of the, big target items, and it kind of made its landmark in advertising history. And now we see that sex sells pretty much everything now. Here are some ads that really demonstrate how they targeted women. Some of them are very derogatory, and we have somewhat gotten better and somewhat not in society. Jane Kilborn, if you or Jill Kilborn, if you've ever watched one of her talks, talks about how we use women's bodies to sell things. Not that we don't use men's, but women's bodies specifically to sell things, and it's not in a great way. And so here are some of the ads that you can see started this trend and have kept it going. So one of them is cleaning product. It says, how do you clean stubborn spots off the floor? She's there. One is beer, and it says, don't worry, darling, you didn't burn the beer. You could burn the food, but the beer's still there, right? On the ketchup, it says, you mean a woman can open it? Like, oh my gosh, you don't need a big strong man there to twist the top off. Then you see one of the earlier ads for the skin you love to touch from Woodbury soap. And then talking about smoking for women. Kent satisfies your appetite for a real good smoke. For a good smoking taste, it makes good sense to smoke Kent. So basically saying, if you want to stay skinny, smoke our cigarettes. And so we see this continue as a trend even up until this day. And it's something that you should just be aware of, that, we are targeting women in these kinds of ways. Now, I say that because, is advertising really worth it to demean a particular audience, not just women, but others in general? Well, here's a defense of advertising before we get into the things that make it bad. Advertising supports our economic system. We are a consumer-based country for sure. Globally, we are like that as well. And advertising helps support and keep that system going, whether you like it or not. People also use advertising to gather information. It's not just about selling you a product. Sometimes it's about selling you a particular idea. And that way you get that information. Ad revenues also make certain media free. So think about, your radio in your car that is not paid by for subscription. Some local cable television channels are paid for by advertising. Different, things allow us to consume for free because of ad revenue. Particularly apps or games on your phone, you can play them for free as long as you watch an ad or earn different things for watching ads. And advertising increases national productivity, or some would say improves the national standard of living. We're always wanting to one up the Joneses, right? We're always wanting the next big thing. So these are defenses of it. You personally can say, well, I don't agree with that, and that's okay. Advertising can be demeaning, especially in our culture with us wanting to always purchase more. That's why there's a trend on TikTok now of like de-influencing, right? But if you look at it as a whole, it is allowing us to support an economic system. Now let's get into advertising and how it's impacting audiences today. So we talked a little bit about the good of advertising, but here are some critiques of it, right? It can be very intrusive. We see lots of ads that we don't really ask for, right? You talk to your friend about the newest game you want to play, or the newest movie or show you've watched, or a product that you want, and then you go on Facebook and you see an ad for that, and it's very intrusive, right? Because you're seeing these things that maybe you didn't really Google it or say anything to Facebook about it, but you're seeing it. And that's because, as we talk about social media here in a few weeks, big data is selling your information and selling what you're looking at. Advertising can also be deceptive. We've talked about this. There are regulations to help with that, but overall, you can buy something thinking it's one thing and it's going to be something completely different. Advertising also exploits children, and there are lots of regulations that go into trying to protect children from advertising. It still sneaks in there. Kids still know about different brands and products and toys that they want. I had a professor who actually followed several families through a store with their permission and watched his toddlers would know about products that their parents didn't even know they knew about because of advertising. Advertising also demeans and corrupts certain cultures. Not only using culture to sell you something, but also it can tear down a culture depending on if it becomes popular or not. And then, of course, data privacy. We, as media consumers and media professionals, need the information about what people want and what they're buying and their demographics. But there's also this privacy issue of like, well, what's going too far to get that information? This just shows you a little breakdown of spending in the US for different mediums in 2019. Internet was the big one. Then you have television, radio and magazines come in for that. But you're seeing that, we are spending a lot on the internet to get ads out. When it comes to advertising agencies, you have several different types. You have boutique agencies that are very specified. They only work with certain brands. If you are a fan of Emily in Paris on Netflix, that is a very boutique agency. They only do high exclusive brands, right? Then you have retainers. Basically, you're using an ad agency on retainer to help you with certain items. Same goes with commissions. So you're using them to help you with an ad campaign or a video or to get research done, different things, but you don't necessarily use them all the time. You have in-house agencies. Most major brands will have an in-house agency where they have people work for them nonstop on advertising, but not all of them. And then within ad agencies, you have different organizations or systems or offices that help them. So that's administration, account management, the creative department, the media department. Both of those probably work together a lot, market research, and then the public relations department. We'll talk about PR next week. But this is kind of how advertising agencies are set up and what they do. We talked a little bit about the regulation of advertising. So, there's always the idea of like 9 out of 10 dentists recommend Sensodyne toothpaste. Well, it doesn't have to tell you that, out of 20, only 9 of them, suggested it. They can kind of fudge those statistics a little bit to help you say, oh, well, this is really good, right? And that's kind of like the idea of puffery. They're not technically lying to you, but they're not telling you the whole truth. And that's kind of where the issue of it being deceiving comes in. And that's where the rules can become gray, right? And so the regulation of advertising, if the AAF or the FTC or whatever see that something is being deceiving or they're lying outright, they can put a cease and desist order out saying you need to take this ad down. Or they can tell them that they have to issue a message saying that what they said was wrong and they need to correct it. And so then you have just false ads, and they do get through regulations. And you have to be very careful about what you are consuming and knowing, doing your research about products. But basically, an advertisement is false if it outright lies about something, doesn't tell the whole truth, or if it lies by implication of a word, a design, the product, device, or a sound. So any of those things could trigger the FTC or other regulations to come in and say, no, you need to take this down right now and change it or issue an apology. So what does that mean when you think about ads that are on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook? Do you think that we have issues with influencer advertising? When I talk about this in my big lecture classes, kids are always like, well, yeah, I think that we do, but social media has stepped in and said, hey, you need to say that this is an ad, or you need to, talk about it more and be very transparent. And I think that they've done a good job at that, but we still get a lot of influencer advertising and even just natural, advertising when people are like, this is what you should buy on Amazon, because they're getting commission off of that, but it's not technically like a quote unquote ad. And so as you go through and we talk about social media here in a few weeks, think about, how does this work and does it influence me to buy certain products? Smartphones and tablets, networking has really become the big way that we see advertising growing. It encourages e-commerce, of course, and especially during COVID, that was a big deal. But a lot of the marketing and the economics that come out of it are surprising. One of the things that advertisers look at is return on investment, or ROI. And basically, they're really just looking at, how is our product doing? Who's buying it? Is there any accountability to the engagement? How the ad is responding in different areas and different target audiences? And what can we do to make it better and make it not feel so toxic or fraudulent? Some of that comes down with creativity, right? They want to get your attention, but they also want to sell you the product. Um, and so uh, the more creative you can be, the less you have to worry about lying or, crossing that boundary, because it's that gray area, right? You're just trying to sell the product in this unique way. And so you can see like the 3M duct tape is holding this billboard together, iPod and iTunes. You have all of this mass media in one area. Tylenol can get you back to normal from a cannonball in the head. And then tailgating isn't worth it, right? Because sometimes you'll crash into the car. And so creativity is a way to not only engage with an audience, but it's also a way to sell the product without selling the product, right? Now, when you look at advertising, two of the big things that they look at research wise is demographics, which is your age, your height, weight, race, nationality, how much you make, where you live, the regions that you visit, what you're buying. Those are very number-based type things, things that they can kind of make target audiences, you know, into certain areas. But then you also have psychographic segmentations, which is really looking at, why are you buying these things? Not so much like who you are as in buying it, like male versus female, or millennials versus Gen X or Gen Z, but like, why? Are you a fan of these things? Have you been an Apple user all your life? Do you like the color red? Do you like the taste of Coke versus Dr. Pepper? Those different things, right? And so you have more of the numbers based, and then you have the why of why you're buying it. With all of this, we've really come into what is known as the VALS 2 segmentation. It's just this idea of 8 values and lifestyles that advertisers use to classify and divide consumers in. So this really goes into the psychographics. And basically, it just breaks it down into these different areas like believers, strivers, makers, survivors, innovators, thinkers, achievers, and experiencers. And through these 8 types of lifestyles, they can segment what products will do well with them, and then how they can specify their advertising for that product. So this is a lot. Advertising is a huge economic resource. And this is just a slight overall history and kind of what it does and where it's going. So take that all in. I know it's a lot, but we will continue to talk about advertising as we keep going throughout the semester, as we've talked about it even before we got to actual advertising. And next week we will talk about public relations and how that relates to how PR relates to advertising.